a seasoned police chief, ambushed and left to die in the woods, bloodied, broken, and chained to a tree with no hope of survival. His only chance? 3 German shepherds, a bond formed by fate, a mission driven by loyalty. They didn't bark, they didn't hesitate, they acted. What happened next will restore your faith in loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between humans and dogs. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. If you believe in heartwarming tales of unwavering courage, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story that will touch your heart. Now, sit back and enjoy today's incredible journey. You won't want to miss this. The rain didn't just fall, it pounded. Thick sheets of water hammered the tin rooftops of Woodhill, a remote town nestled deep within the Pacific Northwest's forested belly. Thunder rolled over the surrounding mountains like distant drums of war. At the town's edge, beyond the last paved road, and into the saturated underbrush of Sector 12, a patrol vehicle cut a lonely trail down the mud-slicked path, its headlights muted by mist and pine. Sheriff Adam Hayes, age 40, was at the wheel. Hayes was a tall man with a solid frame, the type of man who looked like he could hold his own in a brawl, but who'd rather settle matters over a pot of coffee and quiet words. His short, dark blonde hair was damp under his hood, and a rough stubble covered his jaw. There was a quiet weight behind his green eyes, grief etched into the corners from the loss of his wife, Claire, 6 years prior, in a car accident that had left him emotionally adrift, but professionally relentless. Since then, his uniform had become his armor. Work had become the only thing that felt safe. He had received an anonymous tip earlier that afternoon. Unmarked trucks seen driving into the restricted edge of the national forest, near old firebreak trails. The caller didn't leave a name. Hayes didn't wait for backup. With only a standard-issue flashlight and a sidearm holstered beneath his rain-soaked jacket, he moved on foot now, his patrol car parked just off the edge of a crumbling gravel ridge. The rain made everything slick. Ferns bowed under water weight. Tree trunks stood like shadowy pillars in the fog. A sound. A branch snapped. He turned, instincts firing, hand moving to his weapon. Too late. Something heavy slammed into the back of his skull. He crumpled forward into the mud. His flashlight flew from his grip, bounced once, and died. Time passed. He wasn't sure how long. Hours, maybe. When consciousness returned, the pain was instant. His wrists were bound behind him with chain, pulled tight against the trunk of a thick pine. His back and ribs ached. A sharp throb pulsed at his temple. He was bleeding. The storm had eased slightly, now just steady rainfall filtering through a high canopy. But it was colder. The ground was soaked, soft, full of biting insects. A chain looped around his chest, securing him to the tree like some grotesque offering to the forest. His badge had been torn from his shirt, his radio smashed, his weapon gone. Breathing hurt. Moving was impossible. But his mind remained clear enough to understand. This was intentional, not just a robbery or a scare tactic. Someone had meant for him to be found like this, or not found at all. Then came the voice. "You should have stayed in town, Sheriff." It was male, low, muffled, ski mask, black gloves, no name. Hayes didn't answer. He didn't have the strength. The voice laughed, a short, mirthless sound. "We needed quiet. You brought noise." Hayes heard boots retreating, leaves shifting. Silence. Alone now, he blinked through blood and rain, trying to focus on something. Anything. He remembered a dog, not just any dog. Titan. The memory came unbidden. 8 years ago, back when Hayes was a junior officer assigned to assist in a child abduction case. They had called in a young K-9 named Titan, newly certified. The German Shepherd had found the missing girl in under an hour, curled inside a drainage pipe, cold but alive. Hayes had been the first to reach her. Titan had sat nearby the entire time, eyes steady, not moving even when medics arrived. Titan had saved a life that day. Now Hayes wondered if anyone would do the same for him. 20 miles away, at the Woodhill K-9 Tactical Center, the storm was rattling the rafters. The training facility sat atop a gentle ridge overlooking the soaked treetops. Inside the long wooden kennel, 3 German shepherds lay in their designated quarters, restless. Titan, now 10, remained the largest and most formidable. His once jet coat had grayed at the muzzle. The old scar on his left foreleg, earned during a rescue flood in 2019, remained a raised patch of memory. Titan didn't bark without reason. He was known among the team for his control, his ability to assess situations before reacting. His brown eyes flickered toward the barred window. Rain, thunder, and something else. Scout, at just 2 years old, was pacing. His golden tan fur shimmered in the intermittent lightning. Slim and quick-footed, he was the energetic heart of the trio. Scout was a jumper, always testing the edges of his enclosure, nose twitching with curiosity. He was new, but already regarded as gifted in scent work. In the far corner, Apollo watched them both. Apollo was 5, with deep black and rust coloring and a stocky build. Where Scout was all motion, Apollo was patience. He often waited for commands others anticipated. He wasn't lazy, he was precise. On missions, his stillness unnerved some, until he moved like a coiled spring. Their human handlers, Rachel Whitaker and Marcus Bell, were seated in the control room nearby, monitoring weather reports. Rachel, 35, was ex-Navy, lean and hawk-eyed, with platinum hair kept short. She rarely smiled, but when she did, it changed the room. She was known for her ability to read dogs better than people. She trusted instinct, both hers and theirs. Marcus, a soft-spoken former medic in his early 40s, had broad shoulders, a gentle voice, and deep-set eyes that looked permanently tired. He was the only person Titan allowed to tend his wounds without protest. At 9:42 p.m., a dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. Sheriff Hayes missed 2 check-ins. Last GPS signal places him near Sector 12. Rachel frowned. That's restricted. He wouldn't go there without calling it in. Marcus rubbed his temple. Think it's a glitch? Or a setup, Rachel replied, already pulling on her raincoat. The dog stirred behind the wall. Titan stood, but no one had left yet. Not yet. Rain drummed a steady rhythm atop the corrugated roof of the K9 Tactical Center. The storm outside had eased from its earlier fury into something quieter, more methodical-like it was waiting. Inside the central kennel block, the air smelled of wet dog fur, disinfectant, and tension. The digital clock on the wall blinked 10:17 p.m. in dull red. Titan stood silently at the far end of his enclosure, his thick sable coat shimmering in the flickering light from the corridor. His ears were fully erect, pointed toward the direction of the window, his eyes unblinking. He wasn't pacing like Scout or lying in, waiting like Apollo. He was listening. Every few seconds, his nostrils flared as if something in the air had shifted, not the storm. Not the usual smells of forest or damp concrete. Something human, but laced with blood, fear, desperation. Rachel Whitaker, still in her rain-drenched tactical jacket, strode down the hallway between the kennels, rubber boots echoing on the concrete. Her platinum braid, now unraveling slightly, clung to the back of her neck. She paused in front of Titan's pen, brow furrowed. Titan's posture reminded her of something. Years ago, during a blizzard rescue op in Montana, he'd stood just like that minutes before locating a buried man with 2 collapsed lungs. The stillness wasn't passive, it was surgical. Something was calling to him. In the control room, Marcus Bell was replaying the sheriff's last GPS ping on the screen, a blinking red dot frozen at the border of Sector 12. He didn't check in again. It's been over an hour, he muttered. Rachel walked in, arms crossed. His radio? Dead. The system stopped receiving anything from it just after 9. Marcus turned to face her, his expression tight. This doesn't feel like a mistake. Rachel glanced at the monitors showing live kennel feeds. Scout was now bouncing lightly on his paws, tail high, turning circles in his pen. Apollo sat near the back wall, posture tall, eyes locked on the door. Titan still hadn't moved. She opened the intercom. Deploy readiness protocol, code 4. The red lights in the kennels blinked to blue. All 3 dogs straightened. Rachel had served in Fallujah, had tracked insurgents through alleyways using scent dogs and explosive detectors. She'd trained under fire, slept under Humvees, and watched friends bleed in her arms. But even there, she hadn't seen instinct work like this. Titan was no longer reacting. He was preparing. I'm taking them out, she said, strapping on her utility belt. Marcus blinked. Rachel, this isn't a confirmed mission. I'm not waiting for dispatch to confirm someone bleeding out in the woods. We've got 30 minutes before we lose the trail completely. Sector 12's mostly rock and runoff. Nothing holds scent for long after rain. Marcus hesitated. I'll prep the ATV. By 10:29 p.m., the rear training gate opened, tires splashing through mud as the all-terrain vehicle surged out toward the dense, dark fringe of Wood Hills wilderness. Scout was practically vibrating in his harness in the back seat, tail thumping the seat wall. Apollo lay down, nose resting on the bench, his eyes sharp and unreadable. Titan rode up front beside Rachel, unmoving, his ears forward the entire ride. The last time Rachel had taken all three into the field was during the spring landslide in Briar Hollow. A hiker had gone missing under layers of earth and cedar. Titan found the girl's scarf. Scout found her backpack. Apollo led them directly to the site of the cave-in. The dogs hadn't spoken, hadn't looked at one another, but they'd known. Just like now. Back in the forest, Hayes was fading. His breathing had become shallow, and each gust of wind felt like a blade across his raw, rain-exposed skin. Blood dried sticky beneath his collar, and the metal chains around his chest bit deeper with every shallow breath. His legs had long gone numb. He'd tried screaming once. It had come out as a rasp. Since then, only silence. His thoughts drifted strangely, to his wife's hands, to the scent of her apple shampoo, to the way Titan had laid his head on a dying boy's chest during a wildfire search in Utah. Memories mingled with cold. He wasn't sure what was real anymore. But then came a sound, soft, muffled, wet paw pads on earth. Was it real? Was it something the brain invented in its last moments? He didn't know, but his lips moved anyway. Titan. Sector 12's entrance loomed like a warning rusted gates bent at odd angles, overgrown with ivy and years of disuse. Rachel drove straight through. She didn't need to explain her actions. The urgency was visible on her face. The rain had become a mist, and fog clung low to the ground, catching the beams of their headlamps like smoke. Titan suddenly shifted beside her. He stood, nose pressed to the window seam, his whole body leaning forward. Rachel braked. "What is it?" Titan barked, once short, sharp, focused. Scout whined in the back. Apollo stood. Rachel unlocked the rear latch, and all three dogs leapt out, hitting the soaked ground like arrows loosed from a bow. They didn't scatter. Titan went left along a slight slope. Scout sniffed the roots and leaves at a crouch, tail straight. Apollo stood still, nose in the wind, then slowly moved toward the ravine. But this wasn't a chase, not yet. It was the moment the wild quiets before a deer steps into view. Rachel clicked her flashlight to low beam. "Marcus, copy?" His voice crackled over comms. "Copy. They're tracking something. Titan's got point." "Understood. Sending ping request to sheriff's last known location." Rachel didn't reply. She was already jogging after Titan, who had disappeared into the tree line. The hunt had begun. The fog had thickened since the K9 unit first stepped into the forest. Trees loomed tall and dripping, their trunks dark with rain, bark glistening like wet stone. The air held the heavy scent of pine, damp earth, and something subtler human blood carried faintly on the wind. Titan moved with unwavering focus, his powerful shoulders shifting smoothly beneath his damp sable coat. Every step was placed deliberately as he followed a scent trail that only he could perceive, his nose close to the forest floor, tail held steady like an arrow. Scout trailed close behind, the young dog's ears flicking rapidly at every sound, his energy barely contained. He bounced left and right, occasionally veering off path to investigate errant smells, always circling back. Apollo, ever the quiet sentinel, flanked to the right, scanning the tree line with a stillness that made him appear sculpted from shadow and muscle. The three dogs moved like a unit, shaped by years of conditioning, but led now by something deeper intuition. Rachel followed at a cautious pace, boots squelching through the wet undergrowth. Her flashlight cast brief beams of gold through the mist, bouncing off slick moss and low-hanging branches. She wore her weatherproof tactical vest, a sidearm holstered at her hip, and a waterproof radio clipped to her shoulder. Behind her came Marcus, slower, carrying a compact medkit and monitoring the dog's GPS tags on a handheld screen. His glasses fogged slightly from the warmth of his breath. "They're keeping formation," Marcus noted, adjusting the tracker's range. "But Scout keeps breaking pattern. He's picking up false trails." Rachel didn't look back. "Let him. He's the youngest still, learning what to ignore. But Titan, he's locked in." Rachel nodded. That's why I trust him. Scout bounded ahead to sniff a fallen log, then suddenly skidded to a halt, nose to the base of the trunk. He whined softly, pawing at something just beneath the rotted wood. Rachel approached carefully, brushing aside ferns. A scrap of fabric navy blue, frayed at the edge, stained with something dark lay trapped beneath a broken root. Marcus knelt, reaching into a sterile pouch for a swab. "That's uniform standard," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Rachel checked the map overlay on her GPS unit. "We're close to the sheriff's last ping, 200 meters north-northeast." Just then, Apollo stiffened, his body low to the ground, ears pressed back. He let out a slow, steady growl, not one of aggression, but of warning. Rachel dropped into a crouch, one hand on her sidearm. Eyes sharp. He smells something. Titan gave a sharp bark and surged forward through a curtain of brambles, ignoring the thorny snags that raked his fur. The others followed instinctively. Rachel and Marcus ducked beneath low-hanging branches and moved quickly to catch up. They broke into a narrow clearing framed by ancient cedars. A line of boot prints disturbed the mud, deep, erratic, and beside them, drag marks, heavy ones. Rachel knelt. He was moved, or tried to crawl. These looked fresh, no more than 45 minutes old. Apollo moved ahead, sniffing the ground, then circled back, his nose lifted. Scout veered right, barking twice short and high-pitched, before darting into the brush and disappearing. "Scout!" Marcus called after him. Rachel raised her hand. "No watch." A pause. Then a sound from deeper in the trees. A second bark. Lower. Titan's voice. Followed by a third. Apollo, sharp and clipped. Rachel and Marcus exchanged a look. They ran. Branches whipped at their arms. Mud sucked at their boots. The terrain sloped downward into a ravine, and the forest floor was slick with runoff from the storm. At the base of a twisted pine lay a clump of disturbed earth. Scout was pawing furiously at the base. Titan stood beside him, staring intently toward a tree on the opposite side of the hollow. Rachel's breath caught. She stepped closer, her flashlight beam catching something metallic, a chain gleaming through the underbrush. Then she saw him, Sheriff Adam Hayes. Chained upright to a thick pine, barely conscious, his face pale and blood-crusted, uniform soaked through. His eyes fluttered at the light, trying to focus. Rachel's voice was calm but sharp. "Marcus, medkit, now!" Marcus dropped to his knees beside the sheriff, while Rachel moved to assess the chain. Titan stood between them, unmoving like a silent guardian. Apollo and Scout circled the perimeter, alert. "Pulse is weak," Marcus said, sliding a thermal blanket from his kit. "Severe dehydration, bruised ribs, head trauma, no telling what internal damage he's carrying." Rachel snapped open a multi-tool and began working at the chain. "We need bolt cutters." "Didn't pack any. Damn!" Scout, panting lightly, dropped something at Rachel's feet. She looked down. A broken length of rebar, rusted and jagged. She blinked. "Good boy." It wasn't elegant, but with Titan anchoring her position and Marcus supporting Hayes, she wedged the rebar between the loops of the chain and pried, using the strength of her back and a prayer. The rust gave with a groan. Hayes collapsed into their arms. "We've got him," Rachel breathed. "Let's get him out." She radioed for extraction while Marcus injected a stabilizer. Titan pressed his head gently to the sheriff's leg, as if to say, "You're safe now." Hayes stirred. His lips moved. "Hey, Titan?" Rachel smiled. "Yeah, he's here." The rain had started again, soft now, almost gentle. In the middle of that forest clearing, surrounded by loyal dogs and steady hands, the sheriff's eyes finally closed, not in defeat, but in relief. They had found him. The forest around them was too still. After securing Sheriff Hayes with a thermal blanket and IV stabilizer, Rachel and Marcus huddled near his weakened form, whispering over comms to request an airlift. Titan lay beside Hayes, his body half curled in a protective arc, but his eyes were alert locked on the shadows between the trees. Apollo stood just a few feet away, unmoving, nose pointed toward the northeast ridge. His ears flicked once, twice. Scout, tail low and tense, paced in tight circles along the edge of the clearing, sniffing at the wind, pausing often to glance back at Rachel. Something wasn't right. Rachel, crouched with a hand on her pistol grip, noticed it immediately. The dogs weren't resting, even with Hayes found. They were reading the forest like an open wound. "Marcus," she said, her voice low and steady. "Do you hear anything?" Marcus, still adjusting the radio frequencies, froze for a moment. He looked up. "No, and that's the problem." Rachel nodded. "Exactly." Usually the forest had some kind of noise, crickets, wind, distant owls. But now it was muted, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. Then Apollo moved. It was subtle, just a single step, slow and deliberate, toward a patch of brush that looked no different than the rest. His body lowered, legs bent, head tilted. He exhaled once, sharp, his signal for movement. Rachel turned her flashlight toward the thicket, but didn't switch it on. Instead, she raised her hand, signaling Scout and Titan. Scout dropped flat instantly, his chest pressed to the wet earth. Titan rose from Hayes' side and took 2 careful steps forward, his movements silent. Marcus looked toward Rachel. "You think they stayed behind?" "They're here," she said flatly. "Or someone is." Suddenly, Apollo gave a short bark, not loud, but cutting. In response, Titan growled low in his throat. Rachel unholstered her sidearm. "Eyes up," she muttered. From the mist beyond the clearing came the soft crunch of boots. Then a voice, young, male, filled with misplaced confidence. "You're trespassing on private land, ma'am." Rachel stood slowly. She scanned the brush with narrowed eyes, her hand steady. "That man over there is a sheriff. That makes this a crime scene." A figure emerged mid-30s, lean, dressed in dark tactical gear not dissimilar from hers. He wore a green camo jacket with no insignia and held a rifle, lowered but not slack. His face was sharp-jawed, pale, with a scar above the left brow that pulled slightly when he smirked. Luke Harland, local rogue survivalist turned criminal enforcer. Rachel recognized him from a brief on illegal logging operations tied to gun running, known for being slippery, calm under pressure, and dangerously smart. Rachel kept her posture neutral. "You left a man to die out here." "Didn't mean for him to die," Harlan replied. "Just needed him to shut up." Scout barked once from behind her, sharp and alert. Titan shifted again, putting himself between Harlan and the downed sheriff. Harlan chuckled. "Cute dogs. You really bringing canines into a gunfight?" Rachel didn't smile. "Only when I want it to end quick." Harlan stepped sideways, positioning himself so that the tree cover partially obscured his flanks. And then Apollo growled. Rachel caught it just in time. "Down!" she shouted, lunging to the side. A second figure, a stockier man in a black hoodie, emerged from the rear, raising a shotgun. But before he could aim, Titan exploded from the ground, slamming into the man's side with a snarl. The shotgun fired into the air, sending birds screaming from the treetops. Marcus ducked beside Hayes' body, shielding him. Scout rushed the second attacker, teeth bared. The man swung at the pup, but Scout dodged with youthful speed and latched onto the attacker's forearm. Rachel fired a warning shot into a tree just inches above Harlan's head. "Drop it!" Harlan hesitated, then smiled. "Okay." But instead of dropping the rifle, he turned and ran. Apollo shot off like a missile, tail down, legs pumping. Rachel took off behind him, breathing hard, heart hammering. Harlan darted through the trees, surprisingly agile, but Apollo stayed just behind, weaving around branches and stumps. Rachel shouted into her radio. "Suspect fleeing north, K9 in pursuit." Harlan reached a narrow embankment and leapt down into a shallow ravine. As he rolled back onto his feet, Apollo lunged from above, his jaws clamping onto Harlan's shoulder and dragging him hard into the mud. The man screamed, kicking, but Apollo held fast, his weight pinning Harlan until Rachel arrived, gun drawn. "Hands behind your back!" Harlan's face was contorted in pain, eyes wide. "Call him off!" Rachel didn't lower the weapon. "You call off your men first." Back at the clearing, Titan had released the first attacker, who now lay groaning in the mud, his arm bleeding badly. Scout stood watch beside Marcus, who was already restraining the suspect with zip ties from his med kit. Titan returned to Hayes' side like nothing had happened. Hayes, still barely conscious, opened his eyes slightly and saw Titan standing over him again. His lips moved, the words barely audible. "Good boy." Rachel brought Harlan back into the clearing, his arms cuffed behind him, face smeared with wet soil. Apollo trotted behind, not a single drop of blood on his fur, but his eyes still sharp as glass. "I've got 2 in custody," Rachel said into her radio. One of them confirmed as Harland, suspected accomplices in the attack on Sheriff Hayes. Air evac needed ASAP. Thunder rolled softly in the distance as if the mountain itself had released its breath. Rachel looked around at the dogs, Titan calm and steady, Apollo poised but alert, Scout wagging his tail now that the fight was over. The danger had passed, but something darker had been uncovered. These weren't just poachers. They were organized, prepared, confident. And they had nearly gotten away with it. Not for the dogs, not for Titan. A low rumble echoed across the ridge as a black UH-1 Huey medical chopper cut through the dawn mist. Its rotors thumped rhythmically, churning up wet leaves and stirring the scent of pine and diesel in the clearing below. Blue and red emergency strobes flashed through the trees from the lead extraction vehicle as the Woodhill Emergency Rescue Team arrived, 5 responders in bright orange jackets, their silhouettes emerging like phantoms through the fog. Rachel stood in the middle of the clearing, eyes narrowed, wind tousling her braid. Her vest was soaked, her boots caked in mud, but she didn't blink. Beside her, Marcus knelt by Sheriff Hayes, now swaddled in layered thermal blankets, an oxygen mask covering half his bruised face. His pulse was still weak, but stable. The 3 dogs flanked the perimeter like sentinels. Titan had resumed his post at Hayes' side, lying low but tense, ears flicking at every unfamiliar footstep. The elder German shepherd's coat shimmered with rain, and though his breath came slow, his amber eyes missed nothing. His body language read like a coiled spring, ready to launch if Hayes was threatened again. Apollo, still unscathed from the chase, had positioned himself closer to the tree line. He crouched beneath a cluster of ferns, muscles tight, nose twitching. His calm exterior masked an alert, calculating intelligence. Apollo didn't bark often, but when he did, it meant trouble was only seconds away. Scout, younger and more visibly agitated, paced small loops near the trailhead. His tawny coat bristled at the scent of gunpowder, still lingering in the air from the earlier firefight. He huffed short breaths, circling back toward Marcus every few moments, as if asking, "Why hasn't this ended yet?" It hadn't. Rachel turned as Lieutenant Sarah Renner, the field lead for the extraction unit, jogged up the incline. Sarah was in her early 40s, tall, lean, and broad-shouldered. Her ash-brown hair was pinned under a regulation beanie, and her face bore a faint pink scar that curved from her chin to the base of her left ear, a reminder of a collapsed rooftop during wildfire season 3 years ago. It had changed her demeanor. Once a sunny, quick-to-laugh leader, Sarah now spoke with quiet urgency and watched every angle like a chessboard. She wasn't cold, but she never missed a threat. "What's the situation?" she asked, her voice cutting through rotor wash. Rachel pointed toward Hayes. "Sheriff's stable, found chained to that Pinehead trauma, dehydration, likely rib fractures. Suspects ambushed him yesterday evening, 2 in custody." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "How many were there?" Rachel's lips tightened. "Still counting?" As the medics lifted Hayes onto a stretcher, Titan rose alongside them, tail stiff. One of the EMTs, a younger man with wire-rimmed glasses named Evan, hesitated. The dog's not letting me close." Rachel stepped forward. "Titan." Her voice dropped into a gentler tone, one she rarely used outside of these dogs. "Let them do their job. I've got 'em." Titan hesitated, then stepped back, reluctantly, and turned to Rachel. Their eyes met. It wasn't obedience, it was trust. Rachel reached out, resting her palm against the thick fur on his neck. "He remembers him," she whispered to Marcus, who stood just behind her. Marcus nodded. "That connection runs deep. Years ago, before Titan was assigned to Rachel's unit, he had served with Hayes on a short rotation. There had been an avalanche rescue op in the mountains north of the county. Titan had pulled a boy from beneath 6 feet of snow. Hayes had carried the child the final mile. Titan had followed him like a shadow for weeks after. Apparently, he never forgot. As the helicopter lifted off with Hayes and 2 medics aboard, Rachel scanned the surrounding forest. The air was still charged, unsettled. They hadn't accounted for the 3rd attacker yet. The first 2 had been restrained, Harlan cuffed and cursing under his breath from the rear of the support vehicle. But if there were more, and there were always more, they had gone silent. And then Apollo barked, a deep, singular bark from the far eastern side of the clearing. Rachel and Sarah turned at once. Movement, In the trees, gunfire. A rapid burst of automatic fire tore through the air, splintering bark just inches from the rear wheel of the support ATV. Scout darted left, disappearing into the underbrush. Rachel hit the ground, rolling behind a fallen log, drawing her sidearm. The K9s reacted in perfect synchronicity. Titan lunged forward, barking furiously to draw fire away from the medics. Apollo flanked wide, circling from the right. Scout reappeared behind the gunman, just as he emerged, a tall man in camo, beard streaked with gray, eyes wide with panic. He carried a short-barreled SMG and didn't hesitate to raise it, but he never got the chance to fire. Scout launched, striking the man low in the leg and sending him tumbling backward. The gun discharged into the air. Titan hit him next shoulders like a battering ram, jaws clamped around the man's arm, disarming him instantly. The weapon clattered to the ground. Apollo arrived last, not attacking, but standing squarely over the man's chest as he writhed beneath the other two. Sarah whistled sharply, and her officers closed in with restraints. When it was over, Rachel exhaled slowly. Mud streaked her gloves. Her shoulder ached from the fall, but her eyes remained fixed on the three dogs, now standing in a perfect arc around the subdued threat. The team clapped, some with hands, some with words. But it was Titan who got the final look, a single nod from Sarah. "Never seen a wall like that," she murmured. "You train him well." Rachel didn't reply. She simply scratched behind Titan's ear and whispered, "You never needed training to protect him." The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to the air inside Woodhill Regional Medical Center, where fluorescent lights glowed cold against beige-painted walls. On the third floor, room 312 overlooked a sloping patch of forest, the tree line still damp from recent rain. Inside, Sheriff Adam Hayes lay propped up on a hospital bed, his torso wrapped in tight white bandages, and his left arm in a sling. An IV line snaked down from a metal stand, dripping slowly into his wrist. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor blended with the faint hum of machines. Hayes looked older than he had a week ago, his face drawn, cheeks sunken, and purple bruising like watercolor shadows across his jaw and temple. But his eyes were alert now, green and steady, tracking the nurse as she changed the dressing on his forehead. The nurse, Melinda Ray, was a woman in her mid-50s with thick auburn curls tied back in a frizzy bun. She had the warm but blunt demeanor of someone who'd seen too many years in emergency care and didn't have time for nonsense. She adjusted the monitor without looking at him. "You gave us all quite the scare," she said flatly. "You're lucky they found you when they did." Hayes tried to speak. His voice cracked like gravel. "Wasn't luck," he rasped. "It was the dogs." Melinda nodded. "So I've heard. Those three haven't left the waiting area since they got here. It's been 3 days. Took turns sleeping by the door." He closed his eyes. The image formed instantly. Titan's steady eyes, Apollo's sharp gaze, Scout's youthful energy. He remembered the way Titan had pressed against him in the forest, as if refusing to let him slip away. "They saved my life," he whispered. Outside room 312, just beyond the double doors of the ICU wing, the 3 German shepherds lay in silent formation. Titan sat upright near the entrance, a quiet sentinel, his coat recently brushed and his alertness undimmed. He'd refused food until Rachel arrived and fed him by hand the day prior. He only stood to stretch or reposition closer to the door. Scout curled near a bench, tail flicking in half-dreams. His paw twitched once in his sleep, chasing something in a world only he could see. Despite the youthful energy that defined him, he hadn't barked once since they arrived. His ears only perked when a nurse passed, and then he would settle again, as if knowing what mattered was inside that room. Apollo lay under the corner window, watching the hallway through half-lidded eyes. A young girl, no more than 6, approached earlier that morning, holding a small teddy bear. Apollo had raised his head slowly, sniffed the air, and allowed her to pet his flank gently before resting his head back down. He had that calming presence, the kind that made people forget the tension in their chest. Rachel leaned against the wall near the vending machines, arms folded, eyes flicking toward the ICU door every few minutes. Her tactical uniform had been traded for civilian jeans, boots, and a faded sweatshirt that read, K9 Tactical Unit, Oregon Division. She looked exhausted, her platinum hair tied back in a loose knot. Her voice was quiet when she spoke to Marcus, who had arrived with 2 coffees and a newspaper tucked under one arm. "I checked with dispatch. They've officially closed the investigation on the Harlan Group. Marcus handed her a cup. So the rest were caught? 2 more locations raided early this morning, she said. They found maps, radios, even a fake ranger uniform. Scout's scent trail led directly to one of the abandoned cabins. There was blood on the porch partial match to Hayes. Marcus exhaled. And Hayes? Stable, weak but lucid. Docs say he'll walk again. Won't be chasing suspects for a while, though. Rachel took a sip of her coffee. Doesn't matter. He's alive. The newspaper under Marcus's arm slipped slightly, revealing a bold headline. K9 Heroes Save Sheriff in Daring Forest Rescue. Below it, a photo of Titan, Apollo, and Scout, all seated proudly in front of the hospital entrance, tongues out, ears up, eyes shining. The article had gone viral overnight. Community fundraisers had popped up to support the K9 unit. Children had drawn crayon pictures of the dogs, taped to the hospital wall like medals. Rachel glanced at the page, then down the hall toward the ICU doors. He's going to want to see them soon. Marcus nodded. I think they already know. Later that evening, Melinda entered room 312 with a clipboard. You have 3 visitors. Hayes blinked. Deputies? She smiled. 4 legs each. Seconds later, the door pushed open. Titan entered first, slow and deliberate, his claws tapping softly on the tile floor. He approached the bed and stopped, lifting his head to meet Hayes' eyes. The sheriff raised a trembling hand. Titan stepped closer and rested his head gently on the mattress edge. Hayes scratched behind his ear, tears welling. You never gave up, he murmured. Scout bounded in next, tail whipping excitedly, but he stopped short when he saw Titan's solemn stillness. He sat quietly by the foot of the bed, ears forward. Apollo came last, silent and respectful, and stood beside Hayes' right side. He didn't move, just breathed with him. Rachel entered behind them, a soft smile on her face. They insisted. Hayes looked at her. You ever think dogs know more than we do? Rachel's eyes didn't waver. I've stopped doubting it. For a moment, the machines faded. The pain receded. It was just a man, alive, surrounded by loyalty carved in fur and instinct. And for the first time since the forest swallowed him whole, Adam Hayes felt whole again. 2 weeks had passed since Sheriff Adam Hayes had been discharged from Woodhill Regional Medical Center. Though still moving slower than usual, his left arm in a brace and ribs wrapped tight, he walked tall again. The bruises had faded to a yellow-brown hue, but the fire in his eyes had reignited. With each day, strength returned to his voice and stride, and so did something rarer: purpose. The sheriff's office in downtown Woodhill had been modest for decades, a brick building with flaking paint, an American flag fluttering from a rusted pole, and flower pots stubbornly maintained by the dispatcher's wife. Now, it had become something else entirely. Children lined the sidewalk after school, sketchbooks in hand, hoping for a glimpse of the hero dogs. Retirees brought coffee and biscuits, and sometimes the local diner sent over a tray of ribs for the canines. Inside the briefing room, 3 large K9 beds lined the back wall beneath a new plaque that read, Valor in Fur, dedicated to Titan, Scout, and Apollo. Titan lay across the center bed, watching the door like a silent guardian. Apollo sat beside the window, his head tilted slightly as he followed the pattern of falling leaves. Scout, true to form, had claimed the corner and was quietly chewing on a rubber ball someone had gifted him. Hayes stepped in, holding a folder tucked beneath his good arm. He wore a relaxed version of his uniform, khaki pants, black undershirt, no gun belt. The dog stirred immediately. Titan rose first, his tail giving a slow wave. Apollo stood with quiet dignity. Scout dropped his ball and bounded over, almost knocking into Hayes' leg before skidding to a sit. Hayes chuckled. Easy, rookie, still healing here. He reached down to scratch Scout behind the ears before making his way to his desk. Rachel and Marcus were already there. Rachel, in a dark green utility jacket, sipped from a travel mug. Her platinum hair had been cut slightly shorter, framing her face in choppy layers that made her look younger. Since the rescue, she had become the public face of the K9 unit. Reporters had swarmed her for interviews, but she never said more than needed. Fame didn't suit her, but service always had. Marcus wore a navy pullover and cargo pants. A man of few words, he now had a small segment in the local newspaper called Handler's Corner, where he answered reader questions about canine psychology. Surprisingly, he'd taken to it, writing in careful, thoughtful paragraphs, always signed M. Bell and Friends. Hayes lowered himself into his chair. "Any updates from the mayor?" Rachel nodded. "They're extending the K9 program. You've been approved to join the Tactical Response Unit." He blinked. "You serious?" She handed him a letter. It bore the seal of the city council. "You're our liaison now," Marcus added. "They want you in the field again, working with us." Hayes looked at the dogs, at the small family that had formed in the wake of violence. He nodded. "Then let's do it right." That weekend, the town square was transformed into a celebration. Wood Hill's annual Autumn Days Festival, typically a quiet event with caramel apples and pumpkin carving, had become something else this year. Banners hung across lampposts bearing slogans like "K9 Heroes of Wood Hill" and "Stand Tall, Walk Together." A temporary stage had been erected near the old gazebo. Mayor Clara Doyle, a short, energetic woman with silver curls and a blazer adorned with too many pins, took to the microphone with tears in her eyes. "These animals didn't just save one man," she said. "They reminded us all what courage and loyalty really look like." The crowd roared as Hayes walked up beside her, flanked by Titan, Scout, and Apollo. Titan wore a new vest embroidered with the words "Lead Guardian." Apollo's bore "Silent Sentinel." Scout's naturally read "Certified Chaos" and "Proud." Hayes adjusted the mic. "I don't know what I can say that these three haven't already proven," he began. "But I do know this. They didn't act on command. They didn't wait for orders. They acted because it was right, because someone needed help. And that's more than training. That's heart." Applause thundered through the square. Later that afternoon, while the crowd thinned and booths began to close, Hayes found a quiet bench near the Riverside Trail. Titan lay at his feet, Apollo beside him, Scout gnawing on a leftover corn dog a child had gifted him. Rachel approached with 2 hot chocolates in hand. She passed him one without a word and sat beside him. "You sure about coming back full time?" she asked. Hayes took a sip. "They're not just dogs anymore. They're partners. I won't let them go out there without someone watching their backs." She looked at him, truly looked, and nodded. "Then you're right where you belong." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the river move. From behind, a soft voice called out, "Mr. Hayes?" It was a boy, maybe 9, wearing a patchy jacket and holding a drawing crayon lines of 3 dogs and a man standing in front of trees. He handed it to Hayes, wide-eyed. "My mom said you saved the town." Hayes knelt, wincing slightly as he lowered himself. "No, kid," he said, taking the drawing carefully. "They did." The boy reached down and hugged Titan. The old dog didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned in gently. A bond had been built here, not of assignment or obligation, but of something rare and beautiful. Something earned. Morning mist curled through the forested hills of Wood Hill as the sun rose in soft gold over the ridgeline. The small town, once known primarily for its lumber routes and sleepy trails, had become something else entirely, a symbol of unity, courage, and second chances. At the heart of it all stood Sheriff Adam Hayes, flanked as always by 3 silent, steadfast companions. The station was busier now. Calls came in, not just from within the county, but from regional task forces requesting collaboration. There had been a missing child case up in Harlan Ridge. A series of arsons outside of Gray's Hollow. Each time, the same question echoed through the dispatcher's line. Can the Wood Hill K9 team be involved? They could, and they were. On that particular Tuesday morning, the unit was preparing for another deployment. Hayes stood by the department's modified tactical SUV, checking the gear one-handed. The sling still lingered from his fractured shoulder, but it no longer slowed him down. His uniform bore a new patch over the breast. K9 Tactical Liaison, Division Echo. Titan sat beside the rear tire, ever vigilant. At 10 years old, his muzzle was beginning to gray, but his posture remained upright, his presence commanding. People stepped aside when Titan moved. He had a weight about him that required no explanation. Apollo stood to the left, stretching before the long drive. Still the most calculated of the 3, he had developed a habit of scanning every exit before entering any new space, a trait that Rachel claimed makes him smarter than most officers I've worked with. Scout, of course, bounced excitedly between the other 2, tail wagging, harness half dragging. Now 3, his youthful exuberance had not dulled, but it had become more focused. He responded to commands quicker, lingered less on distractions. Still, whenever he completed a task, he would turn and wait for Hayes to acknowledge him, just to be sure he did it right. Rachel emerged from the station holding a set of field reports, dressed in dark green tactical gear and a baseball cap pulled low. Her expression was all business, but Hayes caught the edge of a smile tugging at her cheek as Scout tried to leap into the SUV before the tailgate was even opened. "He's eager," she said. Hayes nodded. "Can't blame him. It's a good morning to make a difference." Marcus followed shortly after, tossing 2 packs of K9 nutrient bars into the gear bag. He wore a gray hoodie over his field vest and carried an unassuming calm as always. "I refilled the med kit," he said, "and brought the compression wraps you like. Still think this mission is going to be routine?" Hayes raised an eyebrow. "When has it ever been?" The team loaded in. Titan took the front seat beside Rachel. Apollo settled near Hayes, while Scout stood perched between the 2 rear windows, watching the landscape blur past as they headed north toward Pine Haven, a neighboring district that had requested assistance on a weapons smuggling tip-off. 2 hours into the drive, dispatch chimed in. "Be advised, Code 9 response now required. Suspects seen entering wooded property near Clearwater Basin. Backup en route. Unit echo your call." Hayes met Rachel's eyes. "Let's move." The SUV veered onto a gravel trail flanked by tall pines. Fallen leaves crunched under tires, and the scent of rain lingered in the soil. At the edge of a clearing stood an old hunting cabin, weathered wood, cracked windows, a truck parked askew beside it. Rachel and Marcus dismounted quietly, signaling the dogs to stand by. Hayes approached the front with Titan at his side. There was movement inside. Hayes gave the signal 2 fingers down, then left. Titan crept forward, disappearing around the side of the structure. Rachel and Apollo flanked the rear. Suddenly, a door slammed open. A man burst out, hood up, carrying a duffel bag. Scout lunged from his post, intercepting the runner before he reached the tree line. The suspect hit the dirt with a yelp, pinned beneath 60 pounds of trained canine muscle. Inside, 2 more suspects surrendered when Titan entered, silent, tail still, eyes locked. One man raised his hands before even seeing the officers. The other dropped his weapon, shaking. 10 minutes later, the suspects were cuffed, weapons seized, and Hayes stood watching the dogs return one by one. He looked to Rachel. "How many did we save this time?" She shrugged. "Hard to measure when it's preventative." Still counts." That evening, back in Woodhill, a celebration was underway in the town square. The mayor had organized it, but no one had told Hayes. He arrived dusty, sore, and mildly annoyed at the flashing lights and media presence, but softened quickly when he saw the signs. "Welcome home, Echo Team. Thank you, Titan, Apollo, and Scout. Real heroes have paws." Children stood in line to pet the dogs. Scout wagged until his tail became a blur. Apollo allowed gentle touches. Titan remained still, a living statue, his eyes always scanning. Hayes stood on stage one more time, tired but grateful. He held the microphone loosely and gazed out at the town that had grown with him. "In life, we don't always choose the path we walk," he said slowly. "But sometimes, we're lucky enough to choose who walks with us." He turned to the dogs. "These 3, they're more than partners. They're guardians. They remind us every day that courage doesn't need words, and that loyalty can come in the shape of a paw." As the crowd clapped, Titan let out a single bark. Hayes smiled. "Guess that's his way of saying we're not done yet." The night closed with stars piercing through the dark, a peaceful sky hanging over the town. Hayes sat later by the station's back steps, his arm around Scout. Apollo curled at his feet, Titan beside him. It wasn't about medals, it wasn't about duty. It was about being needed, and about never walking alone again. We don't choose where our story begins. But sometimes, if we're lucky, we get to choose who walks with us through the pages that follow. Titan, Apollo, and Scout weren't just rescuers. They were reminders. That loyalty doesn't need language. That healing comes in many forms. That even when the world seems silent, someone is listening, waiting, ready to protect. Sheriff Hayes found more than survival in those woods. He found a brotherhood that didn't need words and a reason to keep going. These dogs, once trained for duty, became symbols of something deeper. The power of presence, the courage of quiet hearts, and the beauty of connection that can change everything. Maybe in your own life, You felt alone, unheard, or lost. Maybe today, all you need is a reminder. Someone out there sees you, and sometimes that someone walks on four legs. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need it. Leave a comment. Subscribe for more stories of courage and connection. And may God bless every soul who still believes in second chances and the silent strength of love.